I want to talk about exposure therapy and what that is, and why it is probably the most effective form of treatment in eating disorders. Because the amygdala, the part of the brain that reacts on fight or flight and doesn't really give your self a chance to think logically through a situation, it's there to protect you, has been taught over the years, or however long you've struggled with your eating disorder, to fear certain things based off of your reaction from them. So if you've avoided muffins for, extended period of time, and your heart races each time you don't eat one, and you do this day in and day out and continue to avoid muffins like, the plague, then you have taught your brain that that is something that needs to be feared, that is a threat, that is very scary. And so exposure therapy does exactly that. It runs into those fears. It forces you to approach a muffin, buy a muffin, make a muffin, whatever, eat the muffin, have all of those responses go on, rapid heart rate, irrational fears, all these thoughts of worst possible scenarios that could happen. And as you eat the muffin, you see that none of that happens. Then you teach your brain that, okay, there's nothing to be afraid of with a muffin. And you do it over and over and over again. Then just like you taught your brain initially to be afraid of a muffin, you can teach your brain that a muffin is completely safe and nothing to be afraid of. And so as we do this and we break down different fears in our eating disorders, it's not always just with food. Sometimes it's having to do with compulsive movement. Sometimes it's having to do with how much food we're eating. We have these certain amounts that we're allowed, and anything more would freak us out. And so as we start to break down all of these fears by running into them and practicing that exposure therapy, that's how we retrain our brain. That's how we teach our brain that there is nothing to be afraid of when you eat these things, or when you do these things, when you approach these things. Another example would be, let's say with movement. I know for me that was something that I really honestly believed that if I sat down during the day, like while it was still daylight, I really believed that I would saying it now, I just kind of chuckle, but I thought I'd develop a blood clot, or I thought that my back would just totally stiffen up and then I'd be in so much pain. And there's so many logical reasons I thought as to why I never allowed myself to sit down during the day. And I remember the first few times in recovery that I forced myself early in the day to just sit down, and I did that most of my recovery, but initially to get myself to hey, don't be busy doing things, sit down. I remember honestly, once I did it a few times thinking okay, I see that was a very irrational fear. It's still scary and I still don't like it and it's uncomfortable because it's something different. But I had to continue to do it over and over again to finally teach myself now I can sit very peacefully, and in fact, very much favor sitting over standing if there's a chair or a couch I can sit on. And so that's just another example of how do we actually do this exposure therapy. It doesn't have to be in a professional setting and all formal and everything. It's just basically you saying, okay, here are the things that I'm afraid of, and here are the things that I'm going to start running into. And the thing to remember, the important point is the more that you avoid these things, so the longer you allow them to be a fear of yours, and the longer that you react to I see a muffin and I run. I see a muffin, I make any excuse possible not to eat it. The longer you keep doing that, especially when you already kind of know you need to fix that, the harder it's going to be. So the best thing is to make the decision and just go for it. Make the decision that you are going to tackle all these fears and then just start chipping away at them. Delaying it, procrastinating, thinking about it, hoping and waiting until you're not afraid anymore, trying to figure out a reason or trying to find out a way to not be afraid anymore, asking questions, basically talking the talk is not going to get you over these fears. It's walking the walk, which is basically what exposure therapy is. Running into them, repeating over and over and over again. You'll hear this so many times from people who have recovered. Challenge, repeat, challenge, repeat, challenge, repeat. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it until it doesn't feel like a challenge anymore. And then you're free around whatever that fear was, and it doesn't control you and rule your brain or your life anymore like it did before. And it's so worth it. Running into that fear, yes, it's so uncomfortable. Yes, it's the unknown. In your mind, it feels like the unknown. But there's a reason that it is the most effective tool in recovering from an eating disorder, and that's because it works. It's what got me recovered. It's what changed my brain. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that you, whether you're recovering on your own or with a team or with a coach, that you are accountable and responsible and putting that in place, that you are actively going after your fears over and over and over again until they're not scary anymore. So that's my message today.